had the chance to get some Prosecco, but we're really excited to have Ipsos and Novartis here partnership to share with us how they've unlocked future of digital insights. So we're really excited to hear what you have to share with us. So thank you, Ben and Steve from Ipsos and Jane from Novartis.
Can folks hear me? I just want to verify that. Okay, test. Awesome. So quick intros, Steve Reeves, head of digital strategy at Ipsos Healthcare. Happy to be here.
I'm Janie Vitlina. I'm the COE lead at Novartis for PMR innovation and portfolio insights.
And Ben Potter, also from Ipsos. Steve and I work in the healthcare advisory group on digital strategy.
Perfect. So before we get into the presentation, let me give you a little bit of background on how Ipsos and Novartis came to be, so to speak. It happened, back in April-ish on
early
LinkedIn.
this year.
So just to set the stage, I actually reached out to Janie on LinkedIn saying, hey, the team is growing. I would love to have you on the team. Offered her a role. What was your response? I forget.
I said, no, thank you. That's such a great offer. Thank you. I'm at Novartis, but I just looked at your LinkedIn and it says you are the top 50 most creative innovator in social intelligence. And I really want to know what you're doing because I lead innovation at Novartis. So please tell me what you're doing.
And that kind of opened up a dialogue. And so, the thing that we can point to at Ipsos Healthcare that we're doing a lot of right now is what's coined as ecosystem mapping. Now, if you close your eyes for a minute and you think about when you go onto the web, where do you go? Why do you go there? What influences that decision? What are the touch points along the way? Who are the actors, so to speak, that are producing content that is feeding to you, et cetera. And so we set out to map the ecosystem, the renal ecosystem for Janie and her team. And really it was predicated on understanding the flow of information, both to the patient and the HCP in a digital setting. And interestingly enough, we found a lot of interesting things, I would say. But there are entities that we discovered in mapping the ecosystem and understanding which entities have a greater pull versus maybe a less of a pull on how information flows and potentially misinformation as well, because we're in that age. And so that kind of was the overarching context for the project, understanding how information flows to the patient, to the HCP online, who are the entities that control and shape the narrative in a digital setting, and that actually has application across all therapeutic categories, something that we're investing in heavily with our clients at Ipsos. So tell me a little bit about how you thought the project went. Kind of unpack for me what brought you to the decision that I want to do this. I want to invest in this, and a little bit about the impact, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So the interesting thing is that this project didn't come from us asking a question and saying, Ipsos, can you help us with this? It actually was the other way around. I said, tell me what are the innovative things you're doing. Steve sent me 3 projects, 3 innovative things that he was working on. He said, this one's the most creative. Let's talk about it. And I said, I have budget. Let's do it. And so it
was easy. It was the easiest thing ever.
Easy as that.
It usually doesn't happen that way, right?
The interesting part was that the why this project was so applicable to what we needed, right, which we didn't actually go searching for, was because the underlying question that we had is, where do people go for information? And I am sure that everybody here has encountered that question at some point. It comes across, regardless of industry, regardless of therapeutic area, and usually the answers that we get come from not such reliable methods, right? We use surveys, we ask people where do they want to go, and if you've had a similar experience like me, most of the time your physicians or people or your patients are saying, I went to Google. I went to Google to learn this, or I, read JAMA, or I go to ASN, right? And it's really, they're just regurgitating what is kind of more salient and comes to the top of mind. So what I ended up doing with this work is really taking that question and flipping it on its head, right? Instead of thinking about investigating where are people going for information, it really became a question of who's driving the narrative in the digital space that pulls people in, grabs their attention, and how can we use that, and how can we learn about those influencers and that flow of information to elevate our own content, right, so that it comes out on top, so that it is cycles through that ecosystem more times, so there's more eyes on it, and also how can we use this to make an impact on our investment and media buying strategy.
Yeah, and so if you think about ecosystem altogether, every therapeutic category has an inherently different ecosystem, which makes it really interesting. And typically what we find, and Ben will drill into this, typically what we find is that the folks that, the entities that shape the narrative in a therapeutic category tend to be patient advocacy groups, tend to be patients, emerging HCPs, but maybe less so. We'll talk a little bit about how that was actually flipped on its head in this case. But in essence, we're mapping the entire ecosystem, and within the ecosystem, we want to understand specifically how patients and their digital journey coalesce. And so, 10,000-foot view. Here's the ecosystem, here's what's happening, here are the key players, here are the messages that are going on, here are what competitors are doing, and here's the white space, et cetera. Once you paint the picture of the larger ecosystem, it gives you the ability to then say, okay, great, we have the ecosystem, now let's look at the patient's digital journey and their pathway to information. We can do that with HCPs as well. And then within that, even further, looking at specific digital personas. So I wanted to see if you might want to drill into any of that, because you were the project lead, architect of it, and so give us perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I would expand even between disease areas, even market to market, the ecosystem is very different too. Yeah. So we have run this in multi-market. So if you go over to the EU, it's a totally different landscape. So you really have to look at this in a segmented way, and it's really not lip service. It very much is unique, disease area to disease area. In this case, it was such a rare disease. So we looked at an ultra-rare disease and a rare disease in the renal landscape. And what we saw was a really self-sufficient set of HCPs, nephrologists in this case, that had developed their own community, that were interacting in this really public way, even interacting to the point where they were interacting with patients, which is something we almost never see. And the patients themselves, we always look over time, and it's a community that had grown too. So also very self-sufficient, super engaged, super literate for patients, and it was just really interesting to see. Without a lot of, definitely no advocacy group, and with very little pharma intervention, how sophisticated they were on both sides.
Yeah. And it took an entire team. I think when we discovered that insight, I think it was week 8 of the 10-week, 12-week program, and one of our absolute rock stars, Jaya Sardana, she actually found that in combination with Ashwin Balasubramanian. I got his name right. They make up a fantastic team. Yeah. And so kind of drill in for us, what was your experience like working with the team, if you will, and then talk a little bit about potentially, to the extent you can, what's the impact, right? What did it mean to you and to Novartis?
Yeah, so I just want to preface this by saying we are very strategically not divulging very specific insights or having slides up because this product has not launched yet. This is work that we actually finished just a few months ago, and it's currently being applied. So come back to us next year and get the update. But what I can say is that through what we ended up finding was essentially answers to questions we had been guessing on, right, for years. And it ended up leading to giving us a strategic lens into how do we approach for patients search and social in different ways based on the stages of patients that generally adopt those channels. How do we invest differently based on those channels and patient usage? And from the HCP side, we are really we had a lot of impact in understanding kind of the prioritization for who could be our partners in terms of voice and influence, and then the impact on our media buying strategy and investment. And all in all, when we had this body of work, I mean, this was a lot of work because we didn't just include patients and HCPs. We also had PAGs in there, and we had, other really specific things about search and social that we were asking about. So we ended up having this huge, broad, it was 175 slides, right? Which is something that nobody can use in its entirety. But the point was that this gave us a foundational piece of work that is now, for this pre-launch product, is now the premier body of work to really understand their media approach and their investment strategy, right? For our media planning team and our marketing team, this is now being considered wave 1, right? And our next subsequent waves are intentionally going to be looking at refining, have our investments made impacts, and now how do we go further and understand the impact of other information, other content, and also the impact of misinformation on our therapeutic area, and where we need to go and how we can change that.
Awesome. Ben, I got a question for you. So, you've had a long career in PMR. You've touched qual and quant, and you've also, been very, very prevalent in social analytics and social data, along with myself. When we think about this approach, right, it's less about asking and it's more about observing.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, so when we do this, it's all a passive exercise, and it's a snapshot, and we do it over time, but really taking in a huge volume of data and from many different data sources. So we're not just looking at social data, we're looking at search and web analytics to understand what search patterns there are, what websites they're being driven to, and we're looking at it relationally. So all of that, leads to sort of a different type of insight generation. It's not answering any one specific business question. It requires a lot of touch points with the client to make sure that we're not going down divergent paths. And I will say 175 slide deck, but a killer executive summary, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
Easy to digest, and then 175 slides should you want them. So it's really good, as Janie just said, because it's so broad. It gives you a really good sense of what it is that you're working with, and maybe answer some unknown questions, and let you know what it is that you don't know and what you want to dive deeper into.
And then when we think about the key moments that matter along an information pathway, right? This is, industries outside of pharma have done this for years and years and years, and it's rooted in personalization. And this really lays the groundwork for the future of pharma in terms of creating more personalized experiences for patients and physicians in a digital space, while also understanding the different players, so to speak, the different entities that control and shape narrative. I think that's a really good summation of what we're doing. Should we go to questions? We got about 6 minutes. Is that fair? Great. Go ahead.
There's none in the app right now.
All right, so maybe I can get some wheels spinning. So I can say that with this work, because it has become so foundational, our team actually cut 2 future projects that were going to be done with the media agency. And we actually saved ourselves a workshop for a SWOT analysis, and all in all have probably saved just about $500,000 with this one piece of work.
So you're saying I should have gone at risk?
You should have charged me more. That's what you should have done.
Okay. Any questions? Go ahead.
Is the white paper available to?
It is available. I forgot to put the QR code. It's on my LinkedIn. I posted it right there, so you can grab it on LinkedIn or meet me afterwards, and I can shoot it to you via email. So.
Any other questions from the crowd that I can run around with? Or I can come up with one on the spot, because that's something I'm particularly skilled at, I think. So here's a question for you. You talked about the future of digital insights, right? And at a very meta level, Green Book's tagline is the future of insights. So we're frequently looking to the future of insights, right? Sarah brought it up earlier in her talk, right? The future of insights.
Yep.
So if you were to kind of step out of just this project and just be a futurist for a moment, what is the future of digital insights? Define.
Let's see what she has to say.
Well, so I think it's interesting from a client side, right? You give the consulting side, I'll give from the client side. From the client side, the digital insights the future is almost like getting back to the basics, right? And I'm speaking from a pharma perspective. I know that CPG and retail, they're much more ahead of the game on this, but for pharma, so much of it is really trying to just understand what the heck is going on in this space. What are people talking about? How do we learn about it? How do we know? How do we confirm that we actually are being relevant in the discussions that are happening today? And so I think for at least the next 5 years, the way I see the future of digital insights, it's really getting back to the core fundamentals and being able to use that as kind of a jumping off point to be able to get to maybe where we want to be in 10 years.
Cool. What do you think?
I like to think of it as a way to really generate what I would call organic content. So hopefully we're providing an insight into how this ecosystem works, how it goes, so that you can really become a part of it and really get away from anything that seems promotional and have it really become something that's part of it all. But that shows that you're listening, is empathetic to whatever the HCP's initiatives are, whatever the patient's needs are at any given time. You're listening, you're speaking the same language, and then sort of insert seamlessly into that flow. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, and just the last thing, we're laying the groundwork, like I had mentioned earlier, for understanding how to move towards a more personalized experience in digital settings for pharma use cases, patients and physicians. We're also, in terms of what's innovative, that's the question. We're doing work now on blending RWE data and digital data sources, and so there's a lot that can be learned from the perspective of claims and EHR data and how patients interact with the healthcare system. It doesn't really give a good indication of why it's happening, and so digital data actually, and social data in specific, is a good litmus for understanding the why behind things like line of therapy progression and switch and all that kind of stuff. And so we're down the road on it, I would say, but I think that to me is another area of focus. So
very cool.
Yep.
Very cool.
And that's why we need consultants thinking about smart things like that, so we can learn the foundational stuff and then get to where you are.
Very cool. Thank you all.
we got 2 minutes.
Very
Any
much.
questions?
Oh, we
Go
do.
ahead.
Oh, you want a mic?
I've been trying to speak. So coming from a fellow client, I'm curious, how did you get this shared? How was your dissemination, your socialization of this work? And was everybody on board when you were sharing it around? Or how did you navigate getting it online?
Yeah, so I did this work on my own. So this was not commissioned by my marketing partners. I did this work on my own, and when it came out, really my argument for it was, hold on, don't spend your budget with your AOR. I have a piece of work for you. And so anytime you're able to make an argument of budget savings is always something people are willing to look at. So when I did present this, the kind of insights that we had was really something that our insights department had never had a perspective on before. This was totally new to Novartis. This had never been done by any group in the organization. And so when I presented it, the body of work and just the amount of information that was now able to answer questions that we were guessing on before, like what are people talking about? Who's driving the narrative? How do we invest in certain channels that actually have more share of voice and make an impact? Right? When we had those answers, the team kind of gradually very much drew to this, and actually I ended up working with our executive leadership to make this into a best-in-class approach, something to be instituted across the enterprise for all of the brands in the franchises.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
If there are any economies of scale, once you've done it once, you put the
Yeah.
foundation into an organization,
That's-
then it would be exponentially
Exactly.
expensive, I would assume,
Ye-
to replicate that, because it's a cookie cutter approach, meaning you've got a best-in-class process.
Right.
I didn't mean to, cookie cutter in
No, no,
any
it's-
way. I meant like, okay, you've got a deliverable
Yep.
that works.
Yeah.
From
Yes.
that perspective, and
Yep.
the output of that deliverable is so rich,
Yep.
fuels all these aspects of the business. So all the magic, because you're not talking about the detail of the method
Yeah.
just now, but the point is that can be replicated
Sure.
on any challenge. And then would it get exponentially cheaper?
Correct, yeah.
I'm sure the first time. it's
Yeah.
very hard, right?
Yeah, the first time it's difficult, and there's always a level of customization by client. Novartis as an example, but there are certainly there are economies of scale because when you harvest data, let's say from 10 therapeutic categories. And then you match that together, it does save time. And that's the whole concept. The idea is to add value across the pharma enterprise. And so how can you build a framework that sits sort of at the center and is able to cut across your therapeutic categories and provide a homogenized level of insights that every TA would benefit from. So,
And just to follow up, is can you take previous research and plug it in? In other words, could your methodology, does it have to be all new data? Or could you also somehow work in, let's say we have studies for the past 5 years.
Yep.
Could you somehow absorb that?
we do, yeah, we do all the time. So and one example is like a traditional patient journey schematic where you'd overlay a digital approach to it. And so, yeah, that's possible. We do it all the time. So I think we're out of time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Janie. It
Thanks
was such a
everyone
pleasure.
who dropped off the happy hour. Yes.
She's really the rock star in this. So.
I want to thank you all so
No, we
much.
appreciate it.
So, all right, cool.